This meeting is being recorded.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of Local Author Spotlight. This time we are featuring our own Miss Nancy Flinchbaugh this evening. We have a special guest host for you this evening, Grayson Sanders. Wait, there he is. Grayson is an administrative assistant at Wittenberg University. He works in the arts, theater, and dance departments, and he is joining us tonight to be our guest host. So feel free to take it away, Grayson.
Hello. Yep, as already mentioned, I'm an administrative assistant at Wittenberg University for the art and theater and dance department, and I'm looking forward to being the host tonight. But of course, it's not about me. Tonight it is about Nancy Flinchbaugh and her latest novel, Revelation in the Roots, The Emerald Isle. And I believe, are we starting now with the introductory interview, or that we had already set? I'm sorry, I'm pulling up the itinerary now.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to do the introduction and interview first. Yeah.
Yes.
So I've got that ready to go, Grayson. Just give the word.
All right. Yes. All righty. So we're going to begin first with some brief introductions. I will introduce myself, then we'll switch to Nancy, and then we're going to start the interview, which we have recorded, and some great answers in there. I think I'm really looking forward to hearing what you, the feedback you'll have and engaging with this work. Yes, so, sorry, one moment, please. Alrighty, so and for those who may not know already, the MAMS is a it's sort of a the phrase I kind of keep coming back to, you know, with Marvel and all of its movies. It almost seems to be developing to kind of its own universe in a way, right? So it initially branched as this sort of book club, and they've since built up a couple of these group homes, and then now the stories are developing within those group homes as well. And so it's really interesting, I think, about Nancy's work here, is that it's a really good example of how something small can just sort of spread and grow into this entire sort of multi-level project you're working on. But I really don't want to eat up all the time with me talking. I'd like now to sort of switch to Nancy Flinchbaugh. And if you could just talk briefly about sort of the that universe that I mentioned briefly, and then what the way you were hoping this novel would fit into that universe, so to speak, and then we'll sort of segment into the interview, I believe.
Okay. Well, yeah. So I just finished launching my new book, Revelation in the Roots, Emerald Isle. It's the third in the MAM series, and the Magnificent and Marvelous Book Club. I'll talk about this a little bit in the interview, but they went to Turkey. In the first book, they started two group poems. In the second book, Revelation of the Labyrinth, and now they're off to Ireland, exploring their DNA, taking along some group poem members with them. Is that what you wanted, Grayson?
Yes, sorry, I muted myself. Yes, no, that was excellent. So I think with that, this would be a good sort of segue into the interview. Did I hear someone had that prepped and ready to go?
He's got it ready to go.
All righty, I will mute myself then as as my other voice begins to talk.
I'm having technical difficulties. Hang on. Okay, one more time. Can you see that?
Yes.
Hello, and welcome to
Yes.
another local author spotlight with the Clark County Public Library. I am Grayson Sanders, and tonight we are joined by local author Nancy Flinchbaugh. Nancy was born and raised in Ohio. She grew up in Dayton, attending Belmont Elementary School, Belmont United Methodist Church, Belmont High School, and Audubon College. She and her two brothers were born into a happy family. Her dad was a United Methodist pastor and chaplain, and her mom was a dietitian and stay-at-home mom. From an early age, Nancy chose to follow Jesus and felt a call to serve God and people with her life. As a young adult, she felt called to work for peace and justice, and more recently for the earth. In the past 10 years, her Christian walk has been focused on the Christian contemplative path, incorporating meditation and encountering God in silence. After majoring in religion and sociology in college to prepare to serve God and people, Nancy worked in campus ministry in Ames, Iowa, then attended the University of Iowa in Iowa City, where she became certified to teach secondary social studies. She moved to San Antonio, Texas in 1983 to teach, where she met her husband, Steve. Together they had two sons, Luke and Jacob, and Nancy became a mediator, completing a master's degree in education, counseling, and began to work in conflict resolution at the University of Texas at San Antonio. When her father had a stroke in 1994, she and her husband decided to move to Ohio to care for Nancy's parents. Nancy obtained a job at the city of Springfield, working for peace and justice, serving God and people as the fair housing and mediation coordinator until she retired last year. And when she returned to Texas for a retreat, her friends told her that she was a writer. So Nancy began The Artist's Way book by Julia Cameron, and over the past 25 years has discovered her friends were right. Nancy writes as a spiritual practice. While working, Nancy got up at 5 a.m. each morning to meditate, pray, and journal and write. Her writing projects grow out of her morning prayer time. She wrote her first book in 2012, which she self-published, and now she's written 4 more, including Revelation and the Roots, which we are featuring tonight. Nancy is enjoying retirement, spending time with her husband and visiting with her sons, Luke and Jacob, who are software engineers in Seattle and Los Angeles. She is active in First Baptist Church, enjoys leading spiritual retreats, labyrinth walks, and workshops, and wakes up now at 6 a.m. instead of 5 a.m. to pray and write. She enjoys traveling to visit friends and family, riding bikes, yoga, tai chi, walking, dancing, photography, and playing the violin and dulcimer. She plays her violin with the USS Jammers and the Springfield Dulcimer Club. A longtime member of the Springfield Toastmasters Club, she also enjoys public speaking. She maintains websites at thespiritualseedlings.com and nancyflinchbaugh.com.
Hello and welcome. I am Grayson Sanders with the Clark County Public Library and their author spotlight here with Nancy Flinchbaugh to talk about her latest book, Revelation in the Roots, The Emerald Isle. Hello, Nancy, and thank you for doing this interview with us. We are thrilled to have you here and get to talk about your book and, well, books, plural, and what it has been like being a local author. So I guess starting us off here, very first question, how did you become an author?
Well, Grayson, I guess I've always enjoyed writing. You know, when I was younger, I used to write a lot of poems, rhyming poems, and maybe some devotionals. But after I moved to Springfield, I went back to Texas and I had a retreat with some of my Texas friends. And they said, Nancy, you are a writer. And I thought, what? A writer? They said, yeah, that's who you are. So I guess they'd read some of the things I'd written, but it was kind of like, oh. So they would encourage me to do a thing called The Artist's Way. It's a program for people in creative recovery. And so I started doing that. You know, I was used to doing some devotions every morning. And I started doing the morning pages, which was like journaling and then writing. And eventually some books started to emerge.
So you had
Yeah.
kind of like a friendly navigation toward it, but it was also already sort of part of your routine.
Yeah.
Too. All
Yeah.
right.
They
That's great.
knew me better than I knew myself.
Right. Yeah. That's perfect. So tell me about your new book, then, Revelation in the Roots, Emerald Isle. What motivated you to write this book?
Well, I went to Ireland with my husband for our 30th wedding anniversary, and I thought, I want to write about Ireland. And, you know, at that was 2015, and at the time, with political things, President Obama's family has roots in Ireland, as well as President Trump. I thought, wow, that's something, We're divided as a country in a lot of ways, but we have some common roots. And so the political divide and the racial divide were really on my heart. And so I wanted to write something about that. So I decided to place it in Ireland.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Sorry, because I believe you said you were writing this over the course of about 5 years. Is that right?
Yeah, it took me quite a while to write it. Yeah. And also when we went to Ireland at the Cliffs of Moher, which is a beautiful place on the west coast of Ireland, there's a display there that says, because of climate change in 150 years, Dublin, Cork, and Galway, the three major cities in Ireland, may be all underwater. And I thought how important it is that we resolve our political differences to work together to save human life on the planet. So I decided to have the Mams, they continued the group homes that they started in their first book. And this was way before George Floyd, but I've been concerned about racial things, since I was in college and my career is in fair housing.
So there was sort of a lot of things that kind of coalesced and pushed you towards this particular trajectory to have it happen at this time.
Right.
And I think that's a common occurrence in writers, I'd say. They oftentimes working on something for several years, and then there's a few things that sort of come together and really push it out and have it happen when it does, right? What was challenging about writing this book, especially writing this book as opposed to the other ones you've written?
Well, as I was writing, we went on a nice fun trip around Ireland, but what does that have to do with political and racial divides, So what I was trying to struggle with, where's this going? There's two ways to write a book. Some people plot it all out and they know where they're going, and other people let it unfold. And so I'm kind of more let the characters develop what's going to happen, but it just seemed like something was missing. And people had told me about a peace center in Northern Ireland called Corrymeela. And so I decided to take a second trip to Ireland, and that really helped with a lot of things. I got to go to the Leprechaun Museum, so that's how the leprechaun showed up in the book. And I went to Belfast to learn about the Irish Troubles. And then at the Peace Center itself, I went to a conference on reconciliation and archaeology, which, a little divergent, but I got to see how they do peacemaking at Corrymeela, and that kind of helped coalesce, the book into a resolution. So.
And I can imagine the reconciliation with archaeology would also speak to your earlier work where they go on the dig.
Yeah.
Right. So this must have been an extraordinary journey, not just for this work, but for your previous ones and featured works too. All right. So we were just talking about how a lot of things in your life and in the environment at the time sort of came together to sort of push this book forward, and one of those being the political climate at the time, and I would say currently still, and in particular this incredible divisiveness that's happened, the severe division between all kinds of people. And this book, as we've talked about, sort of aims to handle that division between people. And so how do you get people to come to the table and talk with them? And how do you respect issues that people won't back down from versus get them to compromise and those sort of things? And that's obviously something that's difficult to work with sort of in person or real life. And and it can be its own beast to work with when you're trying to write something about that. So what would be a piece of advice, sort of something practical, to improve someone's writing who wants to grapple with ideas or characters with really conflicting ideas, either from their own or from each other, and so that each has justice, each is done justice in the story? What would be some advice for that?
Well, I think that's a good question. And I think all authors have to do some research. You know, currently I'm working on a sequel to this book, and I'm thinking I need to talk to some people that have the perspective of my character that's different than my own perspective. You know, what I did in Revelation in the Roots, I had two high school friends. One's a Democrat and one's a Republican. I had both of them read the book and ask me if they felt it was biased. And then I made some changes, you know, and I think having a good writers group or having a good writers code also helps you, you know, to have an authentic voice. But it's certainly a challenge, you know, but I think with research and feedback, you can kind of hone the characters to be more authentic.
Yeah, and I like that advice too, because if your mission is all about valuing other perspectives and voices in the first place, then it makes sense, of course, to go and get other perspectives and voices on your writing too. So I think that lines up really nicely with the goal.
Right.
So the next question, and speaking of goals, I suppose, why should someone read this book? Why would you recommend someone read this book? Well, what is something that they could find in it? Maybe a hidden gem or elements?
Well, okay, I'll just give you a couple quick 10 reasons to read the book. Number one, you get to tour Ireland. You know, people like Ireland, and it's kind of a beautiful place. And I described that in my book. Get to go on my anniversary trip with me. Number two, you'll get to see Ireland from the Mams, a magnificent and marvelous book club. They're a group of eclectic red hat ladies, and they like to have a good time, and they all have a little different perspective. Number three, you can read a book that matters. As we've been talking about this, I think it's an important topic. And it was actually published by All Things That Matter Press. So I'm really happy about that. Number four, it's a message of hope, you know, in our difficult times. Number five, you'll get to go on a silent retreat. Maybe you've never thought about doing that, but you will, in the heart of Ireland, go on a silent retreat by Bridget's Well with the nuns of St. Bridget. Number six, you get to walk with people in recovery. I think we all know that drug and alcohol problems are really wreaking havoc in our country. So crucial that we help walk with people that are trying to heal from these problems. The Mams actually find an AA group in Ireland. You know, we usually associate Ireland with St. Patrick's Day and going out time and having a good time drinking. Well, there are a lot of alcoholics in Ireland also, and AA has been active there for many years. So the group home members get to go to an AA meeting in Ireland as part of the trip. Number seven, you can explore the goodness of listening. The leprechaun tells Abigail early on, listen. And so she decides to have listening circles as they travel the island and listen to each other. And sometimes listening provides heated exchange when people disagree, but it's important to listen together to each other. Number eight, I hope it will encourage you to consider bridge building, and you'll actually get to visit a rope bridge on the east coast of Ireland. Number nine, I hope that the book will help you consider that we are all one in our humanity and often in our DNA. And number 10, I hope it will also encourage dialogue. So those are good reasons from my point of view why you might want to read this book. Make you think and move towards a better future together.
Great. And you mentioned that you were excited you had it published with, I'm sorry, remind me, it was
All Things That Matter
Things
Press.
That Matter. Okay. All Things That Matter Press. So what was your excitement about having it published with them, if you want to speak to that at all?
Well, they just say we publish books that matter. And, you know, so I feel like my book matters. Of course, I guess every author feels that way.
Right. Well, I suppose that on the note of getting books published, so you've published, this now is your 5th book. So, and obviously there are plenty of people out there who want to write a book, or who maybe don't know that they have a book in them but could, but they don't get published for one reason or another. There can be countless obstacles and such. So what would be your advice for someone, as someone who has now successfully published books 5 times, what would be your advice? It seems maybe silly to try to condense it down to a sound bite in an interview, right? But what would be something that you would give as advice for someone who wants to publish their first book?
Well, I would recommend The Artist's Way. I thought it was a great way to get started, by Julia Cameron. I would encourage you to join a writer's group. Also, maybe get a writer's coach. I found that was very helpful. But I think the main thing is to set a discipline and just show up and start writing. You may say, oh, I want to write a book, and you never actually discipline yourself to write. So if you can schedule yourself every day, time to write, that's the most important thing. And just show up and do it and get help for whatever you need. And that was what I just retired about a year ago. So most of the books I wrote before I went to work in the morning, sometimes a half an hour, sometimes an hour, maybe 2 hours on some mornings, but I get up at 5 a.m. and start my day early and write. And it was so rewarding. It was like one of my favorite times of the day. So
yeah. Alrighty. Well, great advice, I think. And especially that note about getting involved more in the sort of process and atmosphere of writing as well. Like getting involved with writers groups, having a discipline to it. So because there's a shift that goes from being a reader into being a writer. And so I think drawing attention to that, saying you have to sort of plunge yourself into that environment, that mission, is a different atmosphere. And I think a good thing to point out. Alrighty, so moving on then from that, now that you have published 5 times, we've talked a little bit about this book, but would you like to talk at all about the other 4 books that you have written? You mentioned they're all Mams books, correct? Involved with this
I've written 2 other books that were Mams. Like the first book, Revelation in the Cave, that was when the Mams started reading nonfiction, and they were reading about the Roman Empire. And in that book, they read a book that had Thecla on the cover, which was a saint. And they didn't read the book. It was a little too much theology for them, but they decided they wanted to go dig her up. So one of them had an archaeology friend and wrote a grant again to take these ladies to Turkey. And there they dug up scrolls from the 1st century that shed new light on the book of Revelation. And there's a lot more going on in that book. But then the next time, for the second book, they started reading about climate change, and they were very concerned. And one of them had a call to start a group home for women in recovery and organic farm. So here the Mams are, their book club, and all of a sudden they're starting a nonprofit, opening an organic farm. And then they thought, well, we need to do something for men. So they opened the Sun Power House. So in the second book, this was the Mams are getting into their group homes, and they, it's about healing. One of the Mams gets breast cancer, but also the main character is an alcoholic, gets out of prison, and it's her healing journey, Thomasina. And it's also about the climate issues. They have a lot of havoc because of the climate, and it has a happy ending, however. I like happy endings. So after that, I wrote a book called Letters from the Earth, which is a memoir of a year in my life in which I received letters from the earth, which I believe are really letters from God that were really helpful as I deal with climate change and try to consider what is Nancy supposed to do. So that's a short book, but it's kind of fun, but it's serious, but I feel like God was calling me to enjoy life as well as to speak up about climate issues. So that was Letters from the Earth. And then my most recent book before Revelation in the Roots was Awakening, a contemplative primer on learning to sit about 10 years ago, I took a class on leading contemplative small groups and retreats, and I started to meditate every day. And I just found that encountering God in the silence is really a transformative experience for me. And I started to share it with other people. I lead retreats and workshops. And so this book is kind of a primer on contemplative practices, meditation, labyrinth walking, Lectio Divina, and some other ways that you can encounter God in the silence. So it's kind of something I can use as I lead groups. So those are my first 4 books, and now we have a third MAMS novel. Right.
Great, and it seems like you managed to cover a wide range of sort of topics and narratives with your stories, all while still having this spiritual focus to it, which I think is impressive. There's something I was going to mention, but I can't remember it, so we'll come back to it if I can. Anyway, so talking about past books, those 4 current books, the 5th one that's just been released, do you have any other writing projects in the works or things we could look forward to in the future?
Originally, I was going to explore have the MAMs travel to 3 places, to Ireland, to the Sea Islands, where a lot of the rice was originally created during slavery in the United States, and then to West Africa, to explore both the Irish roots and the African roots in slavery and in Africa. But it was too much for one book. So right now I'm working on a sequel, which is Revelation on the Sea Island, which is about the MAMs go down to Georgia and North Carolina and South Carolina, and specifically Priscilla, the white MAM who has African roots, and Reagan. They're exploring some of their family history. Again, it's a tour of Savannah, South and Charleston, and some of the places you visit in the South. And then I also did write another book called Mariah of the Wind, which is about, I wanted to write a character that just loves the earth, because I love it. And so it's kind of a young woman, and it's a romance with the swim scientist. So I finished that book, but I haven't released it or tried to get it published yet, because I can only do 1 book at a time, and I'm not in a hurry. So, but that book also includes a pandemic. So, yeah.
Oh, wow. Great. Well, is there any final thing you would like to share before we conclude the interview here?
But I just want to thank the Clark County Public Library for holding these author spotlights, and for you, Grayson, for interviewing me today. Thank you very much.
Well, it was my pleasure, and thank you for being here and participating in one of our local author spotlights. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
To contact Nancy, you can email her at nancy.flinchbaugh@gmail.com. You can find more information about her books and work on her websites, spiritualseedlings.com and nancyflinchbaugh.com. On spiritualseedlings.com, you can find study guides for over 90 books that the MAMS Book Club Springfield have read. The guides include discussion questions as well as short reviews by Nancy and the fictitious MAMS. There are also many letters from the earth that Nancy has received. Follow Nancy on Facebook at Nancy Flinchbaugh Author, where you can also join her Facebook groups, Spiritual Seedlings for discussions related to her Awakening and Letters from the Earth books, and the MAMS Book Club for discussions of her Revelation series and the books the MAMS have been reading. Follow her on Instagram at flinchbaugh.nancy. You can also find videos on Nancy's YouTube channel. She likes to interview people about the themes of her books. Check out her Spiritual Seedlings interview playlist. Nancy welcomes invitations to speak or lead retreats. Email her at nancy.flinchbaugh@gmail.com.
Well, great. Thank you again, Nancy, for that interview. It was delightful hearing your responses and your thought process that goes into your writing here. I just wanted to ask really quickly, did everyone get a chance to write down the contact information there? Does anyone need to see the screen again? Alrighty. I guess I just had my fair share of questions that I got to ask Nancy. So I believe now is the time that we will be transitioning. I'll double check here, but I think we're shifting now into a brief reading of the Revelation in the Roots, the Emerald Isle, and then we'll sort of shift then after that into the discussion and Q&A. Does that sound good to you, Nancy? Are you ready for the reading?
Yeah. And you're going to hear just briefly from three of the main characters. You'll hear from Welby, who's from the South, and he's just getting out of prison. Reagan, who's from the North. Welby's a Democrat, Black Democrat. Reagan's a white Republican. And they're going to get more connected during the story. And then we have Abigail, one of the ma'ams, and she's kind of the featured ma'am. So we're just going to have little blurbs of each of them in this reading.
Is there sort of a brief context that we would need to know about going into these readings? Or
this is just the prologue, so it's just the very beginning. It's kind of where they are before the story begins, really.
Okay, great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Nancy Flinchbaugh, and this is my book, Revelation in the Roots, Emerald Isle, and I'm reading today from the prologue. Marcus Welby to the rescue. His mind raced beyond his body as he crafted his steps to the prize. He perused the blueprints of the Fossil Fuel King's headquarters, tracing the path to the center. For inspiration, he coated his nose with some coke and took a few snorts. Then he went to smoke a joint for one last time. Flying high, he tap danced through his plan to set his people free. Tomorrow he would live out the true meaning of his name. Welby would become Marcus, and the healing of the nation would begin. Black Lives Matter? Hell yes, he'd go down in history. Blow up the Fossil Fuel King's headquarters and kill off some of those white kings holding the nation hostage with their billions. Sacrifice a few of them for the sake of the future. Someday they'd write a rap song about him, their savior, the bomber who set them all free. Nancy Reagan to save the day. Ace Steele, Ace Steele, Ace Steele. The cheering filled the stadium. Reagan stood on the stands behind the dais, waving a Woman for Steele sign, cheering after every sentence for her candidate for president. The handsome, broad-shouldered leader who bellowed to the crowd. When he stopped, she let go and started chanting again with the rest of them. Ace, Ace, Ace. Finally, a man had come to lead the nation back into the good old days. Finally, a politician who would make America better for the people again. We won't let Muslim terrorists in our country. We will deport the criminal Mexicans. We will keep our streets free of crime, locking up those no-good ghetto dwellers, Steele announced. Yes, Reagan thought, this is the man for the job. Reagan looked at her watch. Time for another pill. She reached in her purse and found the bottle, those little pain pills that kept her going. She took 2 for good measure to get her through the morning and help her prepare for her evening shift at the hospital. She shook the bottle, hearing them rattle, and knew there were only 2 left, almost out, but she knew just where she could sneak a few more to keep her going for another week. Ace Steele, Ace Steele, Ace Steele. She joined the thunderous crowd, yelling for her man, hoping for a new day. Abigail, listening. Abigail heard a voice. She craned her neck to listen. She missed her late husband, who often came to meditate and pray with her in the mornings. Okay, I'm going crazy, she thought. But no, now the voice spoke quite clearly. She picked up her pen to write. Ah, the Emerald Isle, such a classic, such a beauty. There the mist rises off the burn in the early morning, and the cock crows a new day. The landscape grounds the soul of the people, it does. There the wells hold mysteries, waters deep from the earth. There the people know how to tell a good story and celebrate. At night the pubs come alive with the fiddlers and the singers and the drone of the bow drum. Ah, my lassie, yes, such joy there, but also such sorrow. The British stole our land, the rich enslaved the poor, but God always spoke to us through the land and then through St. Patrick and St. Bridget. So many starved when the potatoes failed. Those who could escaped to America. Others died. Some of us were left to tell the story. Listen, my dear, and I'll tell ye. Aye, just listen. Abigail looked up. The room lay quiet now. She reread the words. Had she invented this imaginary friend to ease her pain? She closed her journal and stood. She would pretend that didn't happen. A lot of people dreamt of traveling to Ireland, but her people came from Switzerland.
Why did Americans fixate on St. Patrick's Day and the Irish? She didn't get it.
Lost my unmute button there for a second. All right. Yeah. So thank you, Nancy, for those readings. I think they're really rich, and what's great about them too is they, I think, frame each of the characters' perspectives and their sort of the way that their approaches differently, right? Which I think that was a great excerpt to sort of illustrate the breadth of characters involved in these stories, which is great. But I've already said this enough. It's not about me and my questions tonight already. So we're going to move on now to the discussion and the Q&A. So does anyone have the first question? Always the most intimidating one. Who would like to be the first questioner? Well, I don't mind if, sort of being the first one to step forward again. I actually had a question regarding this book involves a lot of a combination of kind of spirits and some magical creatures and elements as well. But at the same time, it grapples with these very real, concrete issues, right? And so my question is, how do you walk that line between incorporating this sort of this magic or this mysticism while making sure it remains grounded in that very real goal of sort of helping that divide?
Well, so if you read in the beginning, the very part of the book, you'll meet the three spirits that talk to the characters. And so there's one of them is Shloshane the leprechaun, and another one is Saint Bridget. And I don't know if you know the story of Ireland's spiritual story, but Saint Bridget is one of the patron saints, like Saint Patrick. And she was quite a wonderful woman. And it's interesting because there was a Bridget as a Celtic goddess before Christianity came to Ireland. And then there's Saint Bridget, who was actually founded an order of nuns. And the stories kind of run together, you know. And so Saint Bridget is really kind of almost a mythical character, but she was actually a real person, and the stories about her are wonderful. She was a peacemaker. She helped the poor. She was a bridge builder. She carried the flame. She just did a lot of wonderful things. And then the third character is Grandmama, who's a matriarch from the American South, African Americans, actually great grandmother of Welby. And so these are three kind of mystical characters that kind of convene meetings throughout the book. And at the very beginning, you see them meeting in the Miami Valley. The leprechaun rides the rainbow down and holds a conference. And they are trying to help the characters come together. They're trying to, that's the way I did it, you know, and they do talk to the characters to encourage them, you know. So they're kind of separate from the story, but you might think our characters are crazy because they're all hearing voices. They're not all of them, but several of the main characters, Welby, Reagan, and Abigail, are hearing these spirits speaking to them during the story.
So correct me right, it sounds like it's sort of a combination of the advantage of introducing them to the sort of the strangeness first is that they kind of know what they're signing up for, right? And then the other element seems to be making sure that the characters or the magical things that you are wanting to incorporate have those direct lines to the element or to the goal that you want to accomplish. Is that, am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, and I think, you know, with Ireland, you know, I think that mystical aspect is kind of part of the Celtic tradition too. You know, the leprechauns are magical creatures that live in the forests, you know, and I think they also talk about Ireland being a thin space where the veil between earth and heaven is very thin. And so the idea that maybe these characters like Grandmama and Saint Bridget that are on the other side can speak to people in Ireland, that also kind of resonates with the Celtic spiritual tradition.
Excellent. Has anyone else feeling brave enough to step forward for a question?
Nancy, you mentioned that your book is really working at trying to bridge the divide in our country. I wondered how you went about trying to make sure you understood the opposing points of view clearly.
Yeah, I think that's always a challenge, to, like I mentioned, like I have a high school friend who's a very well-informed Democrat and another one who's a well-informed Republican. And so I had them read the book. And one of them thought I was a little biased, which obviously I am. So I changed some things to make it more positive for the other side. I don't know if that answers your question. I guess, yeah, I think it's hard. It's a very political time that we live in, and I was writing this book during a very political time. I actually had written it initially with the real political figures that we're all familiar with, and my publisher asked me to take them out. So I had to kind of change it a little bit and make a fictitious characters, and so that they wouldn't be completely aligned with the people that we know and hear about a lot. So yeah, it's a challenge, but I just think, yeah, I spent 26 years as a peacemaker with the city and being a mediator. I feel called to be a peacemaker. I also have very strong political views of my own, but working especially with the Citizens Climate Lobby, and Steve's our local coordinator, and I know Dave, you've been involved with Citizens Climate Lobby too. We know that we're not going to find a solution to the climate unless Democrats and Republicans come together. And so that's why I was trying to create a novel where they would really sit down and try to listen to each other. It's just a beginning. So does that answer your question, Steve?
I have a question, Nancy. Did you do any genealogy research on your own family, and do you have Irish roots?
Yes, and yes. When I was in college, I studied sociology and religion, and for my junior year, I went to Detroit for to study urban sociology, and I took a class on ethnicity and community living, and we had to do a paper on our own ethnic background, and I had to at least go back to my grandparents and their parents. And I remember when I was a little girl, somebody told me that I looked Irish. And I went home and asked my mom, and she said, "No, honey, you're not Irish." And so I just thought, no, I'm not Irish. But then when I was doing my research paper, it turned out that my grandfather's mother was Irish. And somehow they kept that quiet. I think her father had been a drinker, and maybe it just wasn't a positive thing. So yeah, when I actually did my DNA though, at first it came out, I have my mom's family came from Scotland actually. And so at first there's a little bit of Irish in there. Yeah, it's not a large amount. So I wanted to be Irish. I wanted to be Irish. And when I found out I was Irish in Detroit, I went out on St. Patrick's Day to celebrate. I claim that part of, but I have a lot of German too.
May I ask a
The
question?
other things.
You have green on too.
Question for from is it Farzana Dada?
Yes. I just wanted to know, was it difficult to change the real character into fictitious ones? For me, it's very difficult. So how did you manage it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I could respect the publisher's point of view, not wanting to be sued. Some political characters are very into lawsuits. And so I just felt like I wanted to get this book out there. And so I would do whatever it needed to take. And so I had to try to change them enough. I mean, Steve says everybody knows who you're talking about, but I tried to make it a little different. So yeah. So I had to change it enough to be. So I don't know.
Sure.
It didn't really change very much, the book.
Yeah, that's all right. But uh, in our generation or present time, we understand what you're talking about. But if you change into fictitious characters, it would be difficult for the next generation or other people who are not of our time when we are gone. They wouldn't understand what we are talking about.
Yeah. So you kind of would prefer that we keep the original characters or political figures.
That's what I prefer. Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you for explaining. To me, it's very difficult to change the real ones into fictitious ones. Or maybe vice versa.
Yeah.
But thank you. It has been a
No, I think that's a good point, especially about, it can be difficult to do that, especially because they're real people having real impact on the world, right? And so you want to give them the credit that they're due, whether it's good or bad, right? Yeah. Did I hear that there was a question? Was it Dave Brown who had a question?
No, I was just noticing that Nancy was wearing green there, so maybe your Irish is coming through. You probably like green, right?
Yeah, I got this sweater for my book launch a few weeks ago, and I think with each of my books, I tried to pick a color, and green is obviously, on the cover of the book, and it's my color for this book.
I think you were also wearing green in the interview, so it was well planned. So.
Yeah, I wanted you to think it was the same, so I was careful to wear the same color then.
Any other questions?
I'm Annie.
Hi.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting to have a DNA study, or as kind of an experiment and included in the recovery program. I'd never heard of anything like that, so I thought that was really really an interesting journey there. Do you think that contributed to the recovery of the characters in your story?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ma'ams are thinking about that, and they talk a little bit about it. It seems like it's very hard for people in recovery to have a lasting, I don't know if you've read very much or know very many people that have had drug and alcohol problems, but the backsliding is very big, especially with their drug problems right now. So, I think there has to be a lot of experimentation to see what works. Now, I don't know of any programs actually like this. In my last book, I was trying to look especially at how gardening and the earth may help in healing. And I know there have been a lot of programs that have been doing that. I haven't heard of any doing this, but I think it does help people, to have some sense of their background and their depth, and I think for Welby, exploring his Irish roots, along with his African roots, I think that was significant for him.
Yeah, especially since there's a genetic relationship between addiction and I thought that was interesting that you included that.
Yeah. So we'll have to see how they come out, but it seemed like it was a positive experience for all the group home people that went on the trip.
So I believe we are just about to switch now into some announcements that I believe Sarah has. So I just wanted to check really quickly if there were any other questions that you would like to bring up before we move on to some interesting announcements. Any questions? All righty. Well, Sarah, would you like to take it away with some of the public library's announcements coming up?
Sorry, I'm muted.
We can hear you.
Yeah,
okay, good. I'm trying to share my screen. So give me 1 second here. Let me try something else here. 1 second. I'm going to try one more time. I always have problems with this. I'm so sorry.
I think the previous person has to stop their share before you can start yours. Is that how it works?
I
Yes.
stopped my share.
Oh, okay.
Yes, you did. Okay. Well, I'll just go ahead and share with you some of the programs that are coming up in March. We have Kevin Krieger with us this evening. We featured him last January for our first local author spotlight. We're going to have him back here at the main library for a local author book club, and this will feature his latest book called Time Out. If you have not checked out Time Out, there are many copies available at the main library, so feel free to come check out a book. Have a couple weeks yet to read his book before we all meet on Tuesday, March 8th at 6:30. So I will share details with you by email about all of these programs coming up. We also have another program in March. It's our next local author spotlight, this time featuring Angela Henry, who's a native here in Springfield. So she's written several books over the years, and we're going to feature one of her latest books in the local author spotlight. And then if you enjoyed tonight's program with Nancy and her latest book, Revelation of the Roots, Emerald Isle, you'll also enjoy another local author book club featuring this title. If you enjoyed the discussion that we've had tonight, feel free to grab a copy of Nancy's book here at the library and join us on Tuesday, April 5th at 6:30 for a book club. And that will be coming up. We also have Farzana Dada, who's on the call with us tonight. She's going to be featured on April 21st. That's the next local author spotlight featuring Farzana and her book, American Queen. So we look forward to that as well. Once again, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to mention that we are going to make those hybrid book club meetings so you can participate in person, but we also will have it online. So if you want to Zoom in, and I know Kevin, you have family out of town, so we wanted to let your family come if they wanted. They're going to try that, and we'll have a Man's Book Club study guide for all of the book club. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, that's okay. While I'm on here, I just want to let you all know that this program tonight has been recorded and will be available on the library's YouTube channel on the library's website at ccplohio.org. Thank you.
Sarah, will you be sending out a reminder about Kevin's talk? I'm going to be in California at that time, but I would like to join in if I could.
Sure, I'll send out an email right after we dismiss tonight, and we'll have all the information about the upcoming programs and the link to Kevin's program as well.
Okay, good.
There are a few people on that maybe if they didn't get the link from you directly, they might want to put their emails in the chat, or they won't get that information.
Yes, that's true. There were some of you yeah.
Like quite a few of these people, I just gave them the link directly, so
I
can try to give you those emails. I'll try to remember to do that, but
yeah, we'll make sure you all are informed.
Yeah, we'll discuss the books more. There hasn't been a lot of time tonight to discuss the book, but we do hope you'll read each of the books in the author spotlight and come to our book club discussion of it. And now we've done some recordings of me reading some of my other books. So if you want to hang on, and maybe I'll give Jason a chance to wrap up before we do that.
Yeah, were there any final questions regarding the library announcements that were made? Alrighty, well then, as Nancy has so courteously already introduced, we actually have some time left for some readings from her other books. So could you introduce what's happening with some of these readings? What's the context we need to know going into these? Are they sort of a prologue?
Okay, so for
intro?
Revelation in the Cave, I'll just be reading the prologue, which will give you a little taste. It's a little bit of a mystery. You won't know exactly what's going to happen in the book. Revelation in the Labyrinth also, it's part of the prologue. And for the letters from the earth, I'll be reading the first letter from the earth. And then for the Awakening Contemplative Primer, I'll just read a little bit about the meditation chapter, the first chapter in the book. Hi, I'm Nancy Flinchbaugh, and today I'm reading from my first book, Revelation in the Cave. This is the prologue. The brilliant sun streamed into the Ephesus amphitheater, blue domed the heavens above, while the September heat settled dust on the earth below. Even now, after centuries of earthquakes and empires, the concrete steps and perfect acoustics offered a suitable forum for the day. From the platform, Emily glanced out at people gathering for the press conference. In the front row, her grandmother's friends chatted like ladies on an afternoon excursion. A vested man crated a heavy telephoto lens in his hands, aiming at the stage and the others getting ready to speak. A small man in a cowboy hat and blonde hair jotted notes on a long pad, nodding to his subject. She recognized the man being interviewed as an archaeologist from Istanbul. Lining the aisles in the top row, young Turkish soldiers stood erect with machine guns held diagonally across their chests. Emily mentally rehearsed her script, choosing tone inflections and animations to bring the words from the first century alive. Looking up to the tree-covered hill, she focused on the red flag signaling the grotto of St. Paul. Suddenly, Emily could imagine Thesilla there, looking down into the amphitheater. Draped in a blue robe, she cradled the scrolls in her hands. Protecting her uncle's revelation? Emily sensed Thesilla's excitement and her fear. The girl turned, tucked the scrolls under her arm, and began to run, disappearing into the woods. A moment later, Emily imagined yet another image. A red-cloaked man stopped his black horse in the same clearing. Light sparkled on his armor and caught the gleaming point of a spear. Emily shivered. The man pointed the horse towards the woods and charged on. Halim's warm voice rang out and brought her back to the present. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen." Emily focused her attention back to the stage, the microphone, and her new friend, the Turkish archaeologist. Again, she rehearsed her lines, preparing to stand when Ursula called on her. Taking deep breaths, she knew she could calm her heart. Ursula stood and began to explain the archaeological expedition. Emily listened even while she kept reading her own lines. Any moment now, she knew it would be her turn. And then a shot rang out. The man scrambled. What happened? Another explosion, not Turbat. Collapsing her chair, sprawled out on the stage behind the others, she looked up and saw Brother Gabriel. The familiar monk helped her up, shielded her under his brown robe, and ushered her off the stage. Instinctively, her hand patted her breastbone. A dull ache spread down through her heart. Blood seeped out onto her hand. Pulling up the small necklace Josh had given her many years earlier, she gasped at a deep gouge. The imprint of a bullet? A small abrasion oozed red where the metal lamb had been pushed against her chest. Later on the boat, she reviewed the afternoon in her mind and tried to understand what happened at that press conference. Who wants to kill her and why?
I think quite the cliffhanger there. Yes. I'm sorry, I lost internet there for a brief moment, and so I'm coming back. But unfortunately, my viewing is it is not letting me view everyone at once now. I can only see one person's screen, unfortunately. All right, do we have another reading ready to go? Also, I believe it is 8 p.m. So if there's anyone that I know anyone needs to leave, we don't want to keep you longer, than we was outlined. But if we have another reading, okay, excellent. Yes, thank you.
Hi, it's Nancy Flinchbaugh, and I'm reading from the second book in the MAM series, Revelation at the Labyrinth. That night, Molly couldn't sleep. The plight of the earth weighed heavy on her psyche, but somehow the labyrinth walk lifted her spirits. When her menopausal symptoms woke her at 3 a.m., she couldn't get back to sleep and decided to get up. There were only a few weeks of summer left when the tomatoes ripened and the stars aligned to call for the creation of gazpacho. She wanted to make it earlier in the week but hadn't found the time. Now she decided to utilize the pause. The Mams coined the term the pause to refer to that time in the middle of the night when menopausal women tend to wake up and can't go back to sleep. Although generally very irritating, sometimes Molly knew interruptions became blessings. They credited the pause for their past adventure of the archaeological expedition in search of Thecla. Catherine wrote to Ursula Goodtree during the pause. Although getting up during the pause would make Molly sleepy at work the next day, sometimes she got up anyway. Now as Molly pulled out her original Moosewood cookbook to find the recipe, she wished for discovery and answers. In the meantime, she'd chop and combine gifts of earth and then go back to bed. She poured her organic tomato juice into the soup bowl. She peeled cucumbers, sliced them in half, and cut them into long spears before chopping them up into little squares. Her mind turned over the components of hope that had camped out in her thoughts for many years. There's got to be a way to do this life differently, she told herself. Once again, she remembered the company from Michigan, Cascade Engineering, who spoke in town a couple years back. They called themselves a triple bottom line venture. Like other ventures, they focused on making profit, but they also included people and the planet in their bottom line. The 3 Ps, they called it. So no business decisions were made that would negatively impact the environment or their employees or the people of their community and of the earth. Ever since that time, she mulled this very different sort of business model over in her thoughts, believing the approach could forge a new pattern for the future. She wished she could figure out how to do that here in River City to put people back to work. While her hands chopped, her thoughts reviewed the books they had read. She tried to remember the words of Thomas Berry, that Catholic prophet and priest. Jane had brought his book to the Mams. Hadn't he talked about entering a time of the third mediation, the echozoic age? Didn't he say, we must find the philosophy, the strategies, the beliefs too? Molly interrupted her soup making, hunted for her tablet, and sat down in the living room to read his words again. We need not a human answer to an earth problem, but an earth answer to an earth problem. The earth will solve its problems, and possibly our own, if we will let the earth function in its own ways. We need only to listen to what the earth is telling us.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you for those readings. Are there any more? I believe those are the last 2, correct?
Yeah, so now he's going to do letters from the earth to be.
Letters from the earth.
Now you can see how I'm getting letters from the earth. You all think I'm crazy, but except Annie and Carol, Annie and Carol are in my book club and they've read this book. Hi, I'm Nancy Flinchbaugh, and today I'm reading from my book, Letters from the Earth. The original letter from the Earth, May 2015. Introduction. To put this letter in context, I felt very close to the Earth last year when we visited Seattle in the spring. Shortly after arriving, we drove north to the San Juan Islands, where we spent 2 nights at a small resort. The breathtaking beauty of these waterways and great forests affected my entire being. My husband wanted to see the whales, so we went on a whale watching tour. And for a while, we didn't think we were going to see them. But then this humpback whale, bigger than a school bus, poked her head out of the water, standing vertically, and looked at all of us. She's curious, our captain told us. Then she disappeared. A few moments later, he said, she's under our boat. I realized she had the power to turn us upside down. Even the captain seemed a little nervous. She'll come up over there, he said, pointing to the other side of the boat. And there she surfaced once more, poking up her head and looking at us. We snapped pictures of her as she continued to gaze at all of us. So after this, I really enjoyed this time of being in nature and connecting with the earth. So once we were back in time, I suggested we do an exercise from Joanna Macy and Chris Johnstone's book, Active Hope, How to Face the Mess We're In Without Going Crazy. This book talks about our environmental crisis and how to deal with it. We did one exercise, and then we did another one, in which she suggests that we write a letter to yourself from the earth. When we came back after 15 minutes, I read my letter. Dear Nancy, thank you for noticing me. I love you. We are together, one, united. We breathe together. I love you so much. Thank you for speaking up for me. Don't lose heart. We've been working together for a long time. Keep gathering companions. You are not alone. Be positive. Let my spirit sing through you. Have fun. Dance. So many of my creatures dance. You can too. There are many more mountains for you to climb and explore. Speak. Don't be silent. I think you should start a blog. You have many thoughts gushing out of you. Listen. It's coming from beyond you, and we live together. Remember, you are an expression of me. Spend more time with Mariana. Seek out earth teachers. You are a teacher. Teach my truth. Don't hold it in anymore. I will open doors and paths for you. Don't be afraid to follow the path of your life into your journey. Be kind to the people. They're all part of us. Encourage them to get back in touch, but don't push. Just invite. I will wake you up. I will awaken the masses. Let us dance. See us swaying? I have a new consciousness. Don't consider yourself separate and isolated. Wake up to the beauty of a web containing us all. And dance. I say dance. I didn't evolve you into being over 4.7 billion years to have you sit around like lumps on a log. This is a huge experiment and a wonderful dance. Take joy. I'm sorry if it's not ideal. There is pain and also joy. Take joy, learn from the pain. Be real. Keep speaking up. It's not too late. Love, Gaia. When I first read my letter out loud to my husband and my son, I felt happy and a little astonished. It was quite amazing. And I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with it. But my 60th birthday came on the 4th of July, 2015, outside in our backyard on a beautiful summer day, surrounded by family, friends, and flowers. I read out loud this original letter from the earth and announced my intention to continue to listen and write letters from the earth. My friends clapped. I laughed. Those gathered seemed to enjoy the letter. I didn't quite know what would happen next, but I made my public declaration, posted it on my website, and would see what the earth would tell me next.
Really lovely. I like how the sort of survey of readings there show that the connection between the spirituality, but also the environment, but then also the people, you know, and it ties all of them beautifully together. Do we have more readings? Sorry, again, I can't, I'm limited to my screen here now for some reason. So
There's one more, which is the most recent book, Contemplative Awakening.
And this is
Hi, I'm Nancy Flinchbaugh, and today I'm going to be reading from my book, Awakening, a Contemplative Primer on Learning to Sit. This book is about a lot of contemplative practices. And first, I'd like to read you the poem that started this book and my journey. It's called Learning to Sit. I am learning to sit. Some days it's hard. Some days it's easy. I am learning to listen for God. Some days I hear nothing. Some days the love washes me over me into joy. I am learning that we are all connected. Some days I still feel solitary. Some days I realize that 10,000 others join me every moment. I am opening to awareness deep within me. Some days I feel empty. Some days I feel that pulsating reality bringing life. I keep thinking about the courage of the Hubble scientists, some days posed on emptiness in the sky, some days to realize the darkness contained infinite galaxies. I keep thinking if I have the courage to sit in silence, some days I will focus on that emptiness too, and some days I will realize the web of stars and relationships hold us all. So in my book, I talk about each of the practices. I receive a letter from the earth about each of the practice. I talk about my experiences, and then I give suggestions for you, both as an individual and in a group. So I just want to read a little bit here on Nancy's thoughts on learning to sit. Meditation, what a gift. What a learning process. What a struggle. What a blessing. When I wrote the poem Learning to Sit, I was just beginning my practice 8 years ago now. And today I would say I'm still just beginning. Some people say we are all beginners when it comes to learning to sit. If you're like me, you may resist the idea of sitting in meditation. I remember visiting a spiritual director as a young mother in my 30s. The director had Buddhist tendencies, even though she met me at a Catholic retreat center. She recommended that I incorporate silence into my spiritual practice. I remember laughing at the idea. Certainly silence is something difficult to attain as a mother of young children. But more than that, I just didn't see the value. I like to talk. I like to be busy. The practice of simply being did not appeal to me. Now I look back and wish I had taken her advice. Some say that as we age, the appeal of being versus doing grows. Certainly as our bodies slow down, it's easier to sit and do nothing. Perhaps that is why I didn't begin my practice until I entered my 50s. But even then, it happened somewhat accidentally, a divine accident, I think, looking back. I've always enjoyed spiritual learning. Throughout my life, I've enjoyed small groups and retreats, both as a participant and as a leader. One day, I discovered a learning opportunity online with the Shalem Institute for Spiritual Formation in Washington, D.C., to take a class in leading contemplative small groups and retreats. Yes, ever since I read Henry Nouwen in my 20s, I've loved the contemplative side of Christianity. So I applied to take their 18-month course, not knowing that a requirement of the class would be to sit in silence every day for 20 minutes. After all those years, I began to meditate. Yes, it took me a while to come to this practice. Like most people who meditate, I found it difficult. At first, I expected instant enlightenment, sterling new insight, and deep inner peace. Actually, as I began, I learned that I shouldn't look for great insight, just letting go. And in reading Interior Castles by St. Teresa of Avila, I learned that in order to get the deep inner peace, you must first cross the moat. In her book, she uses the motif of the castle to describe the life of prayer. When she talks about the moat, she explains something that most meditators have discovered, that your stuff tends to surface when you work to become silent. The demons and dragons of your life return to disturb the waters of your practice. What also is true, though, is that as you let go of these demons and dragons, the pains of your life, you will find stiller waters, not only in your meditation time, but also in your daily life.
And thank you for that reading too. I think something that's remarkable about I think your works and your practice, it seems too, is you and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems you appreciate kind of active inaction, right? So you talk about how if you want to speak, you need to learn to listen. If you want to if you want to broaden your perspectives and meditate, you need to kind of not do something. You need to sit, right? And so I think what's interesting is there seems to be this element of kind of intentional or like active inactivity, which I think is really really interesting. You know, I think it reminds me of things of like the Tao Chang and those works. But yes, were there additional readings? I believe that was the last one, right?
Yeah, that was the last one.
Well, so with those readings concluded, I wanted to have one final opportunity for, first of all, anyone who had a question that came up, especially after hearing those wonderful excerpts. Did anyone have a question they would like to ask before we sort of wrap up the local author spotlight this evening?
I just want to say thank you, Nancy. I'm a 7th generation farmer, and my father and my grandfather taught us how to listen and how to just sit. And I think that's something that we've lost track of in this today's society, because it's go, 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 and there's everything instant gratification. And I'm trying to teach my grandchildren how to sit and just listen to nature and just be. And that is so hard for them to get that concept. So I think that's something we really need to work on, is to teach these younger people to do that, because you learn so much from just being and not having to think about what's going on in the world, what's happening. Just listen to the earth, because it talks to me every day.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I think one of the practices in my book is Lectio Divina with the earth, where the monks, back in the 6th century, developed a practice to read the Bible meditatively. But some of the people that Shalem say, well, and other writers too have said, you can listen to the earth the way you read the Bible. So the earth does really have a lot to teach us. And
it does.
I think the earth is really influential in the lives of children. I don't know if ever you listened to On Being, but she asked people, what was the religious upbringing? And a lot of people talk about being out in nature. And I think that, is really important in our young lives, to have that experience. I really agree with you there. And there's an organization called No Child Left Inside. It's a foundation that tries to fund things to get children outside more. It is just so important.
It is.
Sorry, someone has something?
I think, we're capable of destroying the earth because we're not in touch with the earth. We need to become more in touch with the earth, which I really tried to highlight Thomas Berry, who was a Catholic priest who wrote prophetically about that. In Revelation, the Labyrinth, I used him, the main character's named after him, Thomasina. But yeah, it's just, anyway, thanks for bringing that up, Mary. I am going to be teaching a class at the Senior Center on my it's called Contemplative Awakening. So if you're 55 or older and want to come to that, it'll begin March 23rd, just from 2 to 3 in the afternoon, but we'll be focusing on a different practice. And I'm hoping Farzana will come one week, because Farzana is featured in that book, as she has an hour meditation practice. She meditates every day as a Sufi Muslim. Anyway.
Great. Any other questions, comments before we conclude? Alrighty, well, thank you for coming to the Local Author Spotlight, and thank you, Nancy, for giving us a sort of a peek into the thought process and the writing process that goes into your works, and that the spiritual process, all those processes, right, and how you weave them all together to make your novels. It was really delightful having you this evening, and having a discussion. So, thank you so much. And I hope that everyone returns for future local author spotlights as well. Yes, Nancy, did you have any final remarks you'd like to make?
Well, I just hope that you will read my book, Revelation in the Roots, Emerald Isle. The library bought 6 copies of it, so you should be able to check one out and read it, or you can buy one. Also, I have copies if you want to get one from me, or it's available on Amazon. If you read Kindle, I think it's just $5.99 if you like to read that way. But anyway, I would encourage you to check it out and read and come and discuss it with me on Tuesday, April 5th. The Mams Book Club, Carol's still here from our group. We usually meet every month. So I'm looking forward, usually when we meet, they didn't get a chance to, I know they've all read the book already, but I'm curious to know what people think, so.
And
Thank you very much, Grayson, for interviewing me, and Sarah for coordinating those programs, and for all of you for spending your time tonight. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Nancy.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy.
Enjoyed it.
You're welcome.
Very much appreciated.
Well, I
Have
think
a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.